A young farmer discovered his tears made mysterious flowers sprout in arid land. When the first purple blossom emerged, he couldn't imagine that miracle would transform not only his life, but his entire community. Amidst ancestral traditions and scientific discoveries, a journey of hope was reborn in Hope Creek. Prepare yourself for a story that will make your heart blossom like the dry lands. Subscribe, hit the like button, and comment below telling us where you're watching this extraordinary story of connection with nature. There are places in this world where the sky seems to touch the earth with greater tenderness. In the small village of Hope Creek, nestled like a rustic jewel between mountains of a green that was once lush, the dawn of that day seemed just like any other. The sun rose lazily behind the hills, painting the sky with orange hues that spilled over clay tile roofs and windows still asleep. But for Ethan, that morning held a secret that would change not just his life, but the destiny of an entire community. At 28, Ethan carried in his calloused hands the living memory of 3 generations of farmers. Hands that knew the weight of the hoe, the touch of the seed, and the texture of the dry earth that, for 3 years now, refused to bear fruit. The night before, sitting at the edge of his barren field, he had done something no man in his family would dare confess. He cried. They weren't silent, restrained tears, as expected from someone raised to face hardships without bending. They were deep, soul-wrenching sobs that soaked the unforgiving land, where his dreams died day after day. And now, there it was, small, fragile, improbable. A single purple flower with petals as delicate as butterfly wings sprouted exactly where his tears had touched the soil. Ethan knelt, incredulous, extending a trembling finger to touch the plant, fearing it would dissolve like a mirage born of despair. "It's not possible," he murmured to the wind, as the sun illuminated the tiny intruder, making it shine like a living amethyst amidst the desert his inheritance had become. This flower, one nobody in the region had ever seen, would be just the first chapter of a story that would unfold over the next 4 seasons. A story about the eternal dance between the old and the new, between what the elders taught and what the heart insists on discovering for itself. In Hope Creek, time seemed to flow differently, like a river refusing a straight path. The hours dragged during the drought, when the sun beat down mercilessly on the parched fields, but sped up during the rainy season, now so rare it had become almost legendary. The older folks told stories of abundant times, when the barns overflowed and no one had to ration water. Stories that sounded like fantasies to the younger generation, who only knew the harshness of a land that seemed to have forgotten how to be generous. Ethan had grown up hearing his grandfather repeat like a mantra, "Plant in the waning moon, harvest in the waxing, never plow against the wind, respect the signs from the sky." Rules passed down from father to son, sacred as verses from a Bible written by experience. But something inside him, a restlessness he didn't fully understand, always made him silently question, what if there was another way? This internal conflict had been with him since adolescence, like a persistent thorn in his side. On one hand, deep respect for the traditions that had sustained his family for generations. On the other, an insatiable curiosity about the new methods he heard about when traders passed through the village. This duality defined him as much as his other notable traits. A determination bordering on stubbornness, a generosity that made him share the little he had, and an almost mystical connection to the land he cultivated, as if he could hear its lament, feel its thirst, understand its silent language. During that first week after discovering the mysterious flower, Ethan watched it obsessively. He measured its growth, noted changes in color, even talked to it in the early morning hours when no one could judge him for such eccentricity. And then, driven by an idea that seemed crazy even to him, he decided to test a theory. If his tears had sprouted that flower, could they do the same elsewhere? So, on a moonless night when the darkness offered a cloak of privacy, Ethan walked to different points on his infertile land. In each spot, he allowed himself to relive moments of deep sorrow, the premature death of his parents, the lost harvests, the deferred dreams. The tears came, sincere and abundant, watering the unproductive soil, Anyone seeing him might think he was performing some pagan ritual, dancing with his own demons under the starry sky. But there was no audience for his desperate act, only the complicit silence of the night and the distant witness of the stars. The next morning, what Ethan found defied any rational explanation. At every spot where his tears had fallen, small purple buds timidly emerged, as if an invisible hand had planted them overnight. It wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. It was something that transcended the agricultural principles. He knew. Something that made his heart pound with a confusing mix of fear and hope. The news spread quickly through the small community, as it only does in places where time trickles by more slowly, and news is rare. Soon, groups of curious onlookers began to gather at the edge of his property, observing from a distance the phenomenon many were already calling a miracle. Among them was Miss Ilara, the most respected healer and wise woman in the region, who watched everything with narrowed eyes and an enigmatic smile on her time-wrinkled face. "The boy has finally found his gift," she'd whisper to anyone who would listen, nodding her head in approval. "The earth always speaks to those who know how to listen." But not everyone shared her enthusiasm. Mr. Silas, the village's traditional healer, an elderly man with opinions even more set in stone than his appearance, initially dismissed the phenomenon as the foolishness of reckless youth. However, his stance would change dramatically when, examining one of the flowers during the second week, he recognized medicinal properties in it that no local plant possessed. With hands trembling with age but still precise in their knowledge of herbs, Mr. Silas rubbed a petal between his fingers, brought it to his nose, then to his lips, in a test only true masters of the healing arts would dare perform. His eyes, once skeptical, widened with a mix of surprise and reverence. This is extraordinary," he murmured, more to himself than to Ethan, who watched anxiously. "This plant contains something I haven't seen in decades, something I thought was lost forever." Thus, against all odds, an unlikely partnership was born between the restless young man and the traditionalist healer. United by a common desire to understand the mystery, Ethan driven by his yearning for innovation, Mr. Silas by the fear that ancestral knowledge would be lost with his generation. They began to systematically study the properties of the purple flowers. The first month brought discoveries that exceeded the most optimistic expectations. While the region's conventional crops continued to wither under the relentless punishment of the drought, Ethan's field gradually transformed into an undulating carpet of purple flowers. The contrast was so stark, it could be seen from a distance, an island of life and color amid an ocean of gray earth and dying vegetation. This unusual spectacle did not go unnoticed by the keen eyes of Helena, the daughter of the community leader, recently returned from the city where she had earned a degree in agronomy. A woman of sharp intelligence and scientific pragmatism, Helena didn't believe in miracles or supernatural interventions. For her, every natural phenomenon had a logical explanation. One just needed the right tools to find it. "Would you allow me to collect some samples?" she asked Ethan one particularly hot morning, the sun reflecting off the glasses that gave her an air of seriousness contrasting with her youth. Ethan hesitated. He had already refused similar requests from merchants clearly only interested in profit. But there was something in Helena's determined gaze, a genuine curiosity that mirrored his own, that made him nod. "Take what you need," he replied, watching her carefully collect samples of flowers, soil, and even the water he used for irrigation. "But I'd like to know what you find out." "You'll be the first to know," she promised with a smile that lit up her face in a way that made Ethan look away, suddenly aware of the sun tanning his skin and the sweat trickling down his forehead. Helena's entry into the story introduced a new dimension to the flower phenomenon. If Mr. Silas represented traditional wisdom, passed down orally through time, Helena embodied scientific knowledge, methodical and evidence-based. And Ethan found himself in the middle, like a bridge between these two worlds that, though seemingly opposite, sought answers to the same fundamental questions: how to heal, how to cultivate, how to survive. The second month brought the first major revelation. Using equipment borrowed from the university where she studied, Helena meticulously analyzed the collected samples. The preliminary results raised more questions than answers. "It's not the tears themselves," she explained to Ethan and Mr. Silas, gathered in the small room of the house that served as a makeshift town hall. "It's a chemical reaction. Your land has a rare combination of minerals I haven't found in any other sample from the region. When exposed to the salinity of tears, these minerals are activated, creating a perfect environment for these specific plants." The revelation dropped like a stone into still water. For Mr. Silas, it meant he wasn't witnessing a miracle, but neither was it a coincidence. For Helena, it confirmed there was scientific potential to be explored. And for Ethan? For him, it was a moral dilemma. For weeks, the village had buzzed with rumors about the miracle of tears, as many now called the phenomenon. Some even attributed some kind of divine gift to Ethan. Merchants began to envision profit opportunities, talking about miracle water and blessed seeds. Revealing the scientific truth would mean dismantling this narrative, perhaps a necessary one, in such desperate times, when hope was worth more than any rational explanation. But Ethan wasn't raised to live on lies, not even comforting ones. Honesty was a value as deeply ingrained in his being as his love for the land. And so, during the harvest festival in the third month, traditionally a celebration where farmers offered the first fruits to the earth in gratitude, even though that year there was little to be thankful for, he made a decision that would change the course of events. Before the entire community gathered in the town square, under the watchful eyes of the elders, and the suspicious scrutiny of the merchants already planning to exploit the miracle, Ethan revealed the truth. Helena had discovered. He spoke about the minerals, the chemical reaction, the possibility of replicating the process scientifically. He spoke with the simplicity of someone who didn't master technical terms, but with the conviction of someone who knew the value of truth. "I don't have powers. I'm not special," he concluded, facing the heavy silence that fell. "What's special is in the land, it always has been. We just need to learn to listen to it in a new way." The reactions were as diverse as the personalities that made up that small community. There was disappointment in the eyes of those who preferred to believe in the supernatural. There was relief on the faces of the skeptics. And there was primarily poorly disguised fury among the merchants who saw their profit plans crumble like sandcastles. Marcus Thorne, the most influential seller of seeds and fertilizers in the region, didn't bother to hide his indignation. Tall and burly, with a perpetually neat mustache that contrasted with his disheveled temperament, he rose from the crowd like a storm about to break. "Is that what you want? To turn our town into a laboratory? Replace our faith with test tubes?" he bellowed, pointing an accusing finger at Ethan. "These flowers are a blessing, a gift that this boy wants to reduce to numbers and formulas." His words found an echo among some present, especially the older ones for whom science still sounded like a threat to tradition. What followed was a heated debate, voices overlapping in a cacophony of differing opinions that stretched late into the night, further dividing a community already weakened by scarcity. Ethan returned home that night with the weight of his decision on his shoulders. He had done the right thing, he had no doubt, but the right thing isn't always the easiest, nor the most understood. He lay on his simple bed, feeling more alone than ever, while the wind whispered unintelligible secrets through the cracks in the window. The fourth month would bring a new blow, this one even more devastating. On a particularly stuffy morning, when the sky felt like a pot lid over a simmering world, Ethan woke to find his precious flowers inexplicably withered. One by one, those that had bravely resisted the drought now succumbed to some invisible ailment, bowing their heads as if in reverence to defeat. Desperate, he tried every measure he knew, changed the irrigation pattern, shielded them from the sun with makeshift awnings, even resorted again to tears. These now genuine, born not of strategy, but of real despair. Nothing worked. Day after day, he watched helplessly the slow death of his extraordinary crop. It was Helena who, after analyzing water and soil samples, discovered the terrible truth. The community well, the primary water source for the entire village, had been contaminated with a specific chemical agent, clearly introduced intentionally, an agent whose characteristics served a single purpose: to destroy that specific type of plant. Sabotage, she declared, her voice trembling with indignation, as she showed the analysis results to Ethan and Mr. Silas, gathered in the small workshop. The healer kept behind his house. Someone deliberately wanted to kill your flowers. It wasn't hard to imagine who would have an interest in such an act. Eyes naturally turned to Marcus Thorne and the other merchants, whose influence in the region depended directly on the farmers' reliance on their products. The possibility that the land could regain its natural fertility without the need for modified seeds or chemical fertilizers represented a direct threat to their businesses. But accusations without proof are like knives without handles, dangerous to wield. And so Ethan faced not only the loss of his special harvest, but also the poison of mistrust spreading through the community. Some blamed him for what happened, as if his scientific pretensions had attracted this curse. Others suspected he himself had destroyed the plants to avoid sharing his secret. The sharpest tongues even hinted at a forbidden romance between him and Helena, motivated by ulterior motives. Amidst this whirlwind of accusations and rumors, only a small circle remained loyal. Mr. Silas, whose initial skepticism had given way to genuine respect, Helena, whose passion for science was surpassed only by her integrity, and Miss Ilara, the old wise woman who at 92 had seen enough of human nature not to be surprised by its lows. It was this unlikely quartet that in the middle of the year, during the harshest drought in living memory, made a discovery that would forever change the destiny of Hope Creek. While analyzing deeper soil samples, collected nearly 6 feet down, they noticed something extraordinary. The roots of the flowers, apparently dead on the surface, had created a complex underground network. This network, invisible to the eye, was gradually spreading, creating a living system that seemed to be slowly purifying the contaminated soil and restoring its mineral balance. It's like they retreated to protect themselves, Helena explained, her eyes shining with the excitement of discovery, as she showed the others drawings she had made of the root structure. Instead of fighting the poison on the surface, they delved deeper, where they could work in peace. Like wise people in difficult times, commented Miss Ilara, nodding her head covered in snow-white hair. Sometimes you have to withdraw in order to grow. The metaphor was not lost on Ethan. He too had withdrawn in recent months, avoiding direct confrontations, working silently, letting the rumors dissolve naturally like mist under the morning sun. Now he understood that this period of apparent inactivity wasn't defeat. It was part of the transformation process, as necessary for plants as for people. With renewed determination, he and Helena developed a method to accelerate the regeneration process initiated by the roots. Combining Mr. Silas's traditional knowledge of native plants that attracted certain nutrients to the soil with the modern agronomic techniques Helena mastered, they created a system that could theoretically restore the fertility of large areas, months, not years. But like every significant breakthrough, this one also faced considerable obstacles. The first was practical: the scarcity of resources to implement the method on a large scale. In a community already impoverished by the persistent drought, any investment, however small, represented an almost impossible sacrifice. The second obstacle was cultural: the persistent mistrust from part of the community, especially among the elders, for whom innovation was synonymous with abandoning tradition. The town council, composed mainly of men and women over 70, proved particularly resistant to any initiative associating science with agriculture, as if the two were mutually exclusive rather than complementary. Our ancestors farmed this land for generations without needing labs or chemical formulas, argued Mr. Henderson, the council president, a man whose rigidity of principles was surpassed only by the stiffness of his spine, permanently bent from decades hunched over the earth. And now this boy and this city girl come telling us we've been doing it all wrong? This clash between tradition and innovation, between the known that no longer works and the unknown that promises but frightens, became the battlefield where Hope Creek's future would be decided. And it was in this tense setting that, in the 9th month, during the new moon ritual, when planting for prosperity traditionally occurred, a phenomenon occurred that no one could have predicted. The lands neighboring Ethan's property, without any direct human intervention, began to show surprising signs of recovery. Small green shoots emerged in previously barren soils. The earth, once hard as concrete, gradually became softer, more receptive. The underground root network, unseen but tireless, had expanded beyond the artificial boundaries of the property, connecting with adjacent fields in a silent embrace of regeneration. For a community where the supernatural always vied for space with the tangible, where prayers for rain were as common as checking the lunar calendar before planting, this event could only be interpreted one way. The miracle, temporarily interrupted, was now returning with renewed strength. But this time, Helena's scientific explanation didn't diminish the enchantment. On the contrary, it amplified it. The roots are cleaning the soil, like our kidneys clean our blood, she explained to a group of curious farmers who had gathered to observe the phenomenon. It's a natural process, but no less extraordinary for it. This approach, presenting science not as a denial of life's mystery, but as a tool to better understand it, began to win over even the most skeptical. Gradually, resistance gave way to curiosity, and curiosity to enthusiasm. Farmers who previously refused to hear about modern methods now actively sought information, comparing notes, exchanging experiences. In the 10th month, when the Council of Elders finally convened a meeting to officially discuss adopting the new agricultural techniques developed by Ethan and Helena, the atmosphere was already one of openness, if not unrestricted enthusiasm. The meeting, held in the community hall where harvests were usually stored, now sadly empty, attracted nearly all the village inhabitants. The debate promised to be heated. On one side lined up the defenders of pure tradition, led by Mr. Henderson, and discreetly supported by Marcus Thorne, whose business interests depended on maintaining the status quo. On the other, the proponents of change, led by the unlikely trio of Ethan, Helena, and Mr. Silas, the innovator, the scientist, and the guardian of traditions, united by a common vision for the future. But fate, always unpredictable in its whims, had other plans for that night. As Ethan stood up to present his case, a murmur ran through the assembly. It wasn't his words causing the commotion, but something far more primal. The sound of rain, heavy and persistent, drumming on the tin roof like the impatient fingers of a long-awaited visitor. In an instant, the hall emptied. Men, women, and children ran outside, abandoning protocol, temporarily forgetting the divisions that separated them. Under the downpour, the first in over 8 months, they danced, laughed, cried, raised their arms to the sky in gratitude. The rain, that gift so basic and so essential, transformed into an almost mystical spectacle, an affirmation of life persisting despite everything. Ethan remained under the hall's awning, watching the scene with tears in his eyes, not of sadness or despair as so many times before, but of a deep, visceral joy. He sensed a presence beside him and didn't need to turn to know it was Helena. Her scent, a mix of old books and wildflowers, had become as familiar in recent months as the smell of wet earth that now filled the air. "They say coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous," she commented, looking at the rain with a smile. "But between us, I think meteorology has a more scientific explanation." Ethan laughed, a rough, authentic sound that hadn't escaped his throat in so long. He'd almost forgotten how liberating it felt. "Maybe we don't have to choose between God and science," he replied in a rare moment of eloquence. "Maybe they're both dancing together up there, like these people down here." The unexpected storm, which meteorologists later attributed to a rare confluence of atmospheric currents, lasted only one night, but its effects extended far beyond the puddles left behind. The rainwater, carrying minerals from the mountains, further enhanced the regenerative effect of the underground roots. In the following days, the landscape of Hope Creek transformed before their eyes. The green, shy at first, spread like a hopeful rumor across fields previously resigned to sterility. Even more significant was the transformation that occurred in the hearts and minds of the community. The meeting, resumed 2 days after the miraculous rain, resulted in a unanimous decision. The method developed by Ethan and Helena would be officially adopted, with community resources mobilized for its large-scale implementation. Even Mr. Henderson, the staunchest defender of tradition, yielded, not without first making it clear he did so of his own accord, not because of pressure from the young folks. In his concession speech, he quoted an old proverb passed down from his grandfather. When the river changes its course, the wise man doesn't build a dam. He adjusts his sails and learns the new currents. The 11th month brought a surprise. No one in Hope Creek could have anticipated the arrival of representatives from the state government, drawn by reports of the miraculous recovery of land previously considered irreversibly damaged. Men in suits and ties, with briefcases full of papers and even more voluminous promises, proposed transforming the small village into an experimental center for sustainable agriculture. "Imagine," said the most eloquent among them, gesturing enthusiastically before the assembled council. "Hope Creek on the national scientific map. Laboratories, investments, researchers, tourism, a whole new economy revolving around the method you developed." The proposal was tempting, especially for a community that had known the cruelest face of scarcity for so long. But there was a catch, and it wasn't small. The government demanded exclusivity and patents on the developed method. In other words, the knowledge born there from the fusion of tradition and innovation, between desperate tears and rigorous scientific analysis, was to become controlled, marketable, exclusive property. This prospect divided the community again, this time between those who saw a unique opportunity for economic prosperity and those who feared losing their hard-won autonomy. The debate dragged on for weeks, heated, sometimes even aggressive, with longtime friends finding themselves on opposite sides of the dispute. Ethan, now respected by all as the catalyst for the transformation they were experiencing, found himself at the center of this political struggle. His opinion was constantly sought, his approval contested by both sides. For someone who had always preferred the contemplative silence of the fields to the hustle of community meetings, this forced spotlight was an almost unbearable burden. The sleepless nights that followed, wandering through his now revitalized fields, he reflected on the long path traveled since that first purple flower. He thought about the cyclical nature of all things, how the land, once fertile, had become barren only to be reborn, how he himself, from an insecure young man torn between tradition and innovation, had transformed into a man capable of integrating these opposites into a harmonious synthesis. And it was during one of these nighttime walks, under a sky so full of stars it seemed about to tumble down, that Ethan had the epiphany that would define the outcome of this story. The answer was there, before his eyes all along, in the roots spreading unseen, ignoring artificial boundaries, connecting seemingly separate fields into a single living network. In the 12th month, during the celebration of the new agricultural cycle, now held with abundance after years of scarcity, Ethan surprised everyone with his decision. Before the gathered community and the government representatives eagerly awaiting his response, he formally refused the funding that required exclusivity and patents. Instead, he proposed a cooperative system where knowledge would be shared freely, with other communities affected by drought. "What we discovered here doesn't belong to us," he declared with an eloquent simplicity that moved even his detractors. "Not to me, not to Helena, not to the government, not to Hope Creek. It belongs to the land which always knew the secret of regeneration. We just learned to listen to it better." His alternative proposal was bold in its simplicity. Hope Creek would indeed become a center for agricultural knowledge, but based on principles of sharing and reciprocity. Farmers from other regions would be welcome to learn the techniques developed, with the commitment to adapt them to their local realities and share their learnings back with the community. An open circuit of innovation, where knowledge would flow freely like the water of a river that knows no borders. To everyone's surprise, the government representatives, after tense consultations with their superiors, accepted a modified version of the proposal, not out of altruism, certainly, but from the pragmatic recognition that the political and social benefits of supporting such an innovative project would outweigh the immediate financial gains from exclusive patents. And so, a full year after the appearance of that first improbable purple flower, the landscape of Hope Creek showed a transformation few would have thought possible. The fields, once deserts of dust and despair, now displayed a vigorous green that stretched as far as the eye could see. The traditional irrigation system, based on ancestral knowledge of lunar cycles and wind patterns, had been ingeniously adapted with sustainable technologies developed by Helena and her scientific colleagues. More importantly, the community had found a new balance between the wisdom of the elders and the discoveries of the young. In the makeshift schools that began to emerge in the previously empty barns, children learned as much about scientific methods as about the knowledge passed down orally for generations. In community meetings, the trembling voices of the elders mingled with the innovative proposals of the younger generation, in a polyphony that, if not always harmonious, was certainly richer and more complex than the monologue of the past. As for Ethan and Helena, their professional partnership had naturally evolved into a deeper connection, built on mutual respect and a shared love for the land. Together, they continued to explore new methods, test hypotheses, dream of possibilities, yet unimagined. Like the underground roots that had saved Hope Creek, their bond grew unseen but solid and nurturing. And Ethan's tears, those that once fell in despair onto an unforgiving land, they were now remembered not as a sign of weakness, but as a symbol of the vulnerability necessary for all rebirth. It wasn't magic that made the land bloom. It was the sincere surrender of a man who, by allowing himself to fully feel his pain, paved the way for a transformation that went far beyond his own field. Because every great change begins like this, with a seed of hope planted in the fertile soil of persistence, watered by the tears of those who refuse to give up even when all seems lost. And you who have followed this journey, perhaps recognize in your own life the fields that seem barren, waiting only for the right moment and the right tears to reveal their hidden potential for blossoming and renewal.